Welcome to the Life Matters podcast with enlightening conversations on success and living well. My guests are all motivated by the desire to make a difference, and they share their wisdom, personal journeys, and a host of practical guidance that we can apply in our lives. Subscribe on your favourite platform and never miss an episode. Bob Parker has spent his career driving growth, leading change and building global brands. During this time, he has inspired hundreds of people from all backgrounds and walks of life to entrepreneurial success. Today, he is at the forefront of executive search and consultancy, helping businesses navigate the rapidly evolving direct-to-consumer landscape across Europe and beyond. His reputation for operational excellence was cemented during his tenure as country manager for a global wellness giant, where he led his territories to become number one in the world for 2 consecutive years, achieving staggering year-on-year growth and a turnover in excess of 100 million. Welcome, Bob. I'm delighted to be talking to you today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Both delighted then. That's good news.
Absolutely.
I'd like to start, if I may, by asking you how and when you became interested in business. What drew you to it? I'd love to know the backstory.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because I think, I wasn't conscious at the time that I had become interested in business. It was when I was in my mid-teens, I don't know, maybe 16. I know I couldn't drive because the story I'm going to tell you will reinforce I couldn't drive. So I passed my driving test at 17. So I must have been somewhere between 15 and 16. And a friend of mine who was a little older than I was, I don't know how this happened, I can't remember, but we bumped into this Indian guy who had got this warehouse in Birmingham, a wholesale warehouse where he was selling T-shirts and jeans. And we got chatting to him in this random way. And he started to talk about how much you could buy T-shirts and jeans for. And it was a fraction of the price that we could see T-shirts and jeans in the shops or anywhere. So, we decided to chuck a few quid in and buy some T-shirts and jeans. And then we discovered locally there was a market on a Saturday where you could rent a store. So we rented a store and off we went. And that was really my first entrepreneurial venture. And that started to go pretty well. And because at that age, even if you make 50 quid, you think you're a millionaire. So we were loving it. We found then another opportunity. This was a Saturday market. We then found a Sunday market, which is a few miles away. Thankfully, the friend of mine that I was in business with, he could drive. So we had a car and we used to load the car off and off we went. And then in addition to that, my brother decided one day we should become DJs. So we got a load of records anyway. So we were running a disco on a Saturday night as well. So that was my first real experience of trying to make a little bit of money on the side, which was fun.
Oh my goodness, I'm surprised you had time for your schoolwork.
I sort of had time for my schoolwork, but if I'm honest, school was never. The only thing I loved about school was they'd got a football team and I loved playing football. And in the summer, they'd got an athletics team and I loved running. So school never really hooked me. And I don't know why that was, to be honest, because my mum and dad were quite keen that I got a good education, and I went to the local grammar school, which they were delighted about, and I was disappointed that I passed my 11 plus because where we lived at the time, there was a secondary model, a comprehensive school, literally a mile from where I lived with 10 football pitches. The grammar school didn't play football, they only played rugby. So for me, passing me 11 plus was a disaster. But for them, it was perfect. So I sort of went through school, not that engaged, but enjoying the sport. And probably by the time I left school, I was earning more money than the headmaster, I reckon. But that's another story altogether.
Oh, wow. And do you think you were shaped by your parents? Because they had a business, didn't they? Do you think influenced things?
My parents actually were quite interesting role models for me because whilst my dad was entrepreneurial and literally in my younger years growing up, he was part owner of a bakery and we had 5 cake shops, bread and cake shops. And I spent my school holidays getting up at ridiculous o'clock in the morning to go with him to the bakery. And my job was to put the jam in the donuts, highly skilled job, I'll let you know. And he was entrepreneurial, but my mom was the opposite. She was very cautious. And sadly, my dad had a very serious heart condition, and the doctors suggested the pressure of getting up so early and working his own business was too much. So when I was about, I guess, 12, 13, he sold half of the bakery to his partner, and he had a job from then on. But I never got a sense that he really enjoyed the job in the same way as he did being an entrepreneur. And he was always pushing the boundaries with my mom to see if he could find another business. And she was always saying no. So my mom was super cautious. My dad was entrepreneurial. So I guess I got a little bit of a balance actually
Mm.
from,
Yeah,
from
that
both of
sounds
them.
good.
And
Yeah.
it was interesting because my mom never changed. And as I went, further in life and enjoyed some success, she'd often refer back to, oh, Rob, when are you going to go and get a proper job? You know what I mean? So she never quite it never sat with her that you could be an entrepreneur. It was safer having a proper job.
So it must have been felt pretty good as a teenager um, having quite a lot of cash compared to your contemporaries. That must have been quite a nice feeling.
It did. I think it was a sort of a different era then than it is now. So I never really felt any resentment from the people around me.
Yeah.
Some of my other friends were also, making some money. And, when I started to make more serious money, I was in an environment where I was around a lot of people who were doing the same thing. So it was never really an issue. And I do get a sense that people were less envious or jealous back in those days and more inclined to say, well done, you. Whereas I
Mm.
sort of, rightly or wrongly, don't get the sense that that's necessarily the case nowadays, actually.
No, but I mean, one of the things I think about sometimes is I wonder if it's because we see more and we're more able to compare ourselves with others because of social media and all the television from around the world and so on. I remember someone saying to me they watched a program one time and there was a guy on the program saying, I didn't know I was poor until I got television because it was the rest of the world came into his life and probably he just lived in an environment prior to that where everybody was the same and had the same. So I
Yeah,
wonder if there's an
I
element
think
of
there's a lot in that. I do think there's a lot in that. And if you think about that, if you're out and about it depends where you live, of course. In London, you see a lot of wealth, and some of the big cities do. But in most ordinary towns, you might see the occasional supercar pass by, or the occasional, scenario that would lead you to think somebody got, an unusual amount of wealth. Whereas on social media, of course, it can be in your face every minute. And so maybe it sometimes creates unrealistic expectations on the one hand that these people have arrived there by accident and why couldn't it happen to me type thing, or maybe it just leads to frustration in the minds of some people that their world isn't quite how they'd like it to be and they want somebody to fix it for them.
Yes, and I suppose even on the other side of that, it could be a form of inspiration, trying to find something positive about it. It could be something that spurs somebody on, couldn't it?
Well, this is the story of life, isn't it? You can look at where somebody else is in their life and go one of two ways. You could go, well, if they can do it, I think I could probably do it. Or you could go, the world's not fair. Well, sometimes the world isn't fair actually, and it can't sort of be fair to everybody. You get back what you put in, I think, in many different ways, many different ways.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something I'd like to get into with you during this conversation.
Mm.
And starting on that path, I'm curious to know, was there a defining moment for you that shifted how you thought about how your own potential and where you could take yourself in life, perhaps?
I can't think of a defining moment. I guess what having the market stall when I was still at school and the DJ business when I was still at school did for me was, I guess, create a sense that it was possible to earn extra money, and you weren't necessarily confined by a wage. Because at the same time, as just before I started the markets, I had a couple of paper rounds. I got paid so much, a round or whatever. So that was sort of a set amount of money for, a set amount of work. And what I found with the market stalls was some Saturdays we'd make a load of money and other Saturdays we'd make no money. And, so it was not as fixed in that way. So not so much a defining moment that made me think about my potential, but my first real career working in a commission only way, which is pretty much in some ways how I've worked most of my life now. I joined financial services when I was 18 as a self-employed commission only salesman, which was possibly the best education I actually had in that space, because it was a tough job. It was before the Financial Services Act came in, so it was not as regulated. We literally just cold called every day through, back in the day, was a telephone directory called Yellow Pages, might still exist. I have no idea. You Google everything now, but back then you look through the telephone book, and we used to just work through the book every day, phoning businesses, wanting to talk to the managing director to invite them in to review their financial affairs. And it was a tough, tough, tough job. I think if there was a defining moment, it was when I looked around the room and saw who was being successful and who wasn't. Actually, what was the defining moment perhaps was that it wasn't necessarily that those that I saw doing well were better financial planners or more intelligent or had some sort of gift. It mostly was that they simply worked harder. And that came about, I guess, because they recognized it was a numbers game and they were less impacted by somebody saying no to them, or often something much stronger than no. So it didn't really matter to them. And I remember clearly thinking, well, I was thinking of quitting most weeks because it was just so tough. And some weeks I was making no money. And of course, my mom was saying, why don't you go and get a proper job in the background? And I remember there was a guy in our office which was ironic. His surname was ironic because our business was making cold calls on the telephone. His name was Richard Yap. You could you couldn't think of a better name for somebody who spent all day on the phone than Richard Yap. So he was probably one of the best cold callers in the office. So I remember clearly one day sitting with him going, Richard, I think I'm going to quit. I just can't stand the rejection. And I said, how do you cope with that? How do you manage the rejection? He said, one of the ways that's been successful for me is, he said, I don't look at each individual call and analyze that call in the context of a yes or no. What I realize is that a sale, any acquisition like that, is a process. You need to get so many no's to get to the next yes, and so many yeses to get to the next appointment. And then one appointment doesn't necessarily lead to another appointment. You need so many first appointments to get a second appointment to get to the point where somebody buys from you. And he said, I've calculated, he said, that my average commission is £1,000 a sale. He said, and I know that to get a sale, he said, I have to present to 10 new prospects face to face. And to get 10 new prospects to sit down with me in the first instance to do that process, I need to make 100 cold calls. He said, so all I do is, rather than think about the £1,000 I might eventually get, I divided it by the 100 people I knew I'd have to speak to, whether they said yes, no, or something stronger. He said, I can't wait to get abused at £10 a time. And for me, that was all of a sudden, oh my
Wow.
gosh, it doesn't matter how good I get at this, more people are going to say no to me and say yes to me. And so therefore I might as well just crack on with it and realize that every call, before I pick up the phone, I don't know whether it's going to be a yes or no. So every call is worth the same amount of money to me. It isn't about the end goal. And that really was a defining moment. So I guess two defining moments to answer your question. One was, I realized that it's not all about talent. It's more about hard work. And secondly, everything is a process there.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a defining moment.
What a fantastic perspective, because that takes the emotion out of things completely, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not personal any longer.
Yeah.
It's not you any longer. It is literally part of the process of being successful. And I think you can apply that to, one of my regrets in life was mom and dad graciously paid for guitar lessons when I was younger, and I didn't go very much because playing the scales was boring. I wanted to be the next, I don't know, the Mark Knopfler or whoever was around at the time. And basically, you've got to go through that pain. You've got to go through that process to get to the place you want to be. And I think that's very true in a business. It's very true in a sales cycle.
Yeah. And how long did you stay in financial services? What
Well,
came?
I was with a national broker in Birmingham, and I stayed there for 3 years and was quickly realizing that I could do what they were doing. So they had agencies, lots of insurance companies, and we were paid, I don't know, 50% of what the actual commission was. So I just started my own financial services company, firstly in Wolverhampton, which is close to where I was living at the time, and then we opened a second office in Birmingham. And at its height, we had about 35 self-employed guys working for us. We just basically replicated, what we'd done in the first company that we worked with, and did that, quite successfully and had a lot of fun at it. And I only came out of it actually because the Financial Services Act came in, I think in 1987, giving my age away now a little bit. But I just knew the landscape was changing rapidly and our type of business probably wouldn't be able to survive or be as profitable in the same way. So we sold it to an insurance company and I moved on to do something different.
So, in a way, really, what the story you've just told is a good example of a shift in thinking, a shift in perspective, and the way
Yeah.
you look at something and approach something that takes takes it from being difficult to it somehow becoming more manageable and logical to you. I want to get into qualities of entrepreneurs because you're obviously, with your history, you are an entrepreneur. We talk a lot about qualities of entrepreneurs, things that it needs in order for you to be one, the traits. What do you think is most underrated? I'm going to sort of flip it a bit. Something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough in entrepreneurship. Is there anything, do you feel, that goes under the radar a bit that might be worth flagging?
I don't know about so much under the radar because I think, in the last couple of decades, there's been so many books written on success and mindset and motivation, and so many entrepreneurs have written their biographies, autobiographies. So I don't think there's no magic wand, there's no magic formula. I think for me, having that belief in yourself and becoming a little fearless, having courage, I guess, is what I'm saying, and also being persistent. When I was in my main career, which, as you know, was with Forever Living Products, where I was the country manager for over 20 years. Somebody very early on in my career, and I can't even remember who it was, bought me it was almost like a weight, what they call it, a paperweight for my desk. It was a small stone, and on it said, "What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?" And it probably took me at least 5 years to really understand what that meant, because when it was first presented to me, I was thinking about what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? Well, I'd probably be a Formula One driver, or I'd be a rock star, or you know what I mean. I misinterpreted what it meant, and actually, I wasn't the only one, because when I really began to realize what it meant, I then used it as an experiment with everybody who came in my office and said, "What do you think of the quote here?" And they go, "Yeah, like if I knew I couldn't fail, I'd be a downhill skier." Or, it was the same as I at first interpreted. But what it really means is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Is you'd probably have the courage to do the things that you know you should do now, or could do now, and you don't.
Mm.
So, that goes back to my Richard Yap story. If you knew that everybody that you phoned in that cold call was going to say yes to you, how many calls a day would you make? Hundreds, because there'd be no rejection, there'd be no obstacles, life would be easy. And so, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail means the very things that you realize are holding you back at the moment are probably the things that you really need to get comfortable with doing.
I think I remember hearing you say one time about if you're not getting out of your comfort zone every week, you're not growing and you're just sort of coasting or staying the same. And do you still think that?
No, 100%. I used to say to the group at Forever Living on a regular basis, in fact, those that were around Forever Living for years must have got tired with me saying the same things, but I truly believe in it. If you are working for yourself, it's fantastic, because you have the opportunity to build or scale or develop something to the level, whatever level you want to build it. There are not the same restrictions in the entrepreneurial world that there probably is in the corporate world, where somebody's paying you what they think you are worth, or paying you what the market norm is. Sort of the space that I'm in now in executive search. When we're looking for a candidate for a client, the client will have done some market research as to what that role on average is worth, and that's probably what they start with. You're not in that space as an entrepreneur. So I used to say to the audience, because they were entrepreneurs, it's lovely being your own boss, but sometimes being your own boss, you need to be accountable in the same way as you would if you had a boss. So what I suggest you do is, every Friday before you start your new week as an entrepreneur, stand in front of the mirror and answer some questions to yourself. And the first question is, I'm on my entrepreneurial venture. I want to make more money than I'm now making now. If I look in the mirror on a Friday, ask myself the question, based on what I did last week in terms of my activity, would I pay me? So I put that in the context of saying whatever it is you want to achieve as an income, let's say you're not on an entrepreneurial venture, but you're trying to make 50 grand a year. If somebody was paying you 50 grand a year at the moment, look in the mirror and say, would I pay me for last week's work? Because one of the things you have to do as an entrepreneur is be disciplined to do the things that you should be doing without somebody telling you that you should be doing them. The second thing that I ask people to ask themselves at the end of every week after they've asked them the pay question is, would I follow me? So this can mean, like, if I'm developing a brand, how excited or energized am I about my brand? Would people follow me because, well, there's something going on over there. Bob sounds really excited about his company. I need to learn more about his company. Or Bob sounds very excited about his product. I need to learn more about his product. Because, so often when you go into work environments, sometimes the owner is behind the counter or behind things, and their attitude and their energy is terrible. So would you follow them as a customer? No, you wouldn't. You'd be going somewhere else. And then the third question is exactly the question that you just said. In the last week, how often have I been out of my comfort zone? Because sometimes we don't want to step outside of our comfort zone. We'd rather do the things that we're comfortable with. Now, if your business is absolutely flying, there's probably no problem with you going a period of time without stepping outside of your comfort zone. But if your business isn't going as fast as you want it to go, then you probably need to do some things that you've put off or you haven't done before, because you need to make that shift into extending your comfort zone.
That's really three really good questions, and everybody knows the answer to that instinctively, don't they?
Yeah.
When they're standing in front of the mirror.
You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, actually,
Yeah.
in some
And it is,
instances.
we naturally shy away from it because discomfort's a form of fear, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. So when I left financial services, I didn't really know what to do. I got a little bit of money that I'd been paid for the company, and a friend of mine, again, I seem to hook up with friends occasionally, but a
Yeah.
friend of mine had a leaflet through the door at his office the same time as I had a leaflet, which was a selling seminar in the evening, 25 quid. Go to the seminar. I thought, I'm going to go and see what this is like. So I pay my 25 quid. I go with my friend. We turn up at this hotel. There's 500 people in the room. We're going 500 times 25 quid. That sounds like a lot of money. So we get talking to everybody we can in the coffee break and say, how did you end up being here this evening? And they said, oh, we got a leaflet through the post. Nobody knew this company that was offering this seminar apart from the leaflet that had come. This is way before social media, Diane. So there was nowhere to post anything. This was a leaflet through the post. So we decided between us that we would start a similar sort of thing. And because of my background in cold calling, we started a course called More Business by Telephone. So we designed a leaflet. We bought a mailing list for Birmingham, our hometown, of 1,000 companies. We hadn't even got a course, but we got a leaflet. So we printed the leaflet, sent it out to our mailing list. And lo and behold, this is back in the day again, it was checks through the post. There was no bank transfers. Lo and behold, I'm opening envelopes every day, and random people have sent me money, and I haven't even got a course to do. So anyway, we had a good response. So we thought we better put a course together. So we put a course together. So we run the course, and this is about putting off the things you don't want to do. Whilst I've done a little bit of sales training to my team in my own company in financial services, I'd never purported to train anybody else. So now everybody's paid this money. I have to be at the front of the room talking about how to get more business by telephone. It was absolutely terrifying. However, the lure of the money was also very attractive. So after that first one, we ran a second one. We got an even bigger response, the second one. And then me and my partner go, you know what, if we could do this in Birmingham, we could do it in Liverpool, Manchester, Preston, anywhere. So that's exactly what we did. And in those early months of doing this, there was significant amounts of money being made at each seminar. But literally, sometimes I was driving to the seminar hoping that my car broke down. So I'd have a good excuse not to turn up at the seminar and speak.
Oh my goodness. The phrase that springs into my head, I mean, first of all, I'm actually terrified for you just hearing the story. But the phrase that pops into my head is fortune favoring the brave. And I mean, that there was accountability there, wasn't there? You'd got the money from these people. You had to deliver.
Yeah. I mean, you play a little bit of golf. There's that famous golf, I don't know, it was Gary Player or somebody like that. Somebody said he had made a lucky shot, and he said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot of that. Once you've stepped outside your comfort zone, it's still scary. But if you do it over and over and over again, eventually it doesn't necessarily become not scary, but it becomes manageable.
Yes.
So you understand that when you're going to make a presentation, there's going to be a degree of trepidation, of course, because you want to give it your best shot. You don't want to look a fool, etc., etc. But when you step outside your comfort zone on a regular basis, you do extend your comfort or semi-comfort zone, and I think that's exactly the key to success, not to stand still.
I completely agree. Not wanting to be a bit of negative person, I'm wondering, you've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years. You've seen some people become extremely successful, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of people who haven't. Are there common mistakes or traps that you see people fall into? Have you been able to gauge with people who's going to be successful and who isn't in your experience, or is it just really difficult to tell? And are there lots of surprises along the way?
There are lots of surprises. Sometimes you meet people and you think, my goodness, this person's going to go far. They've got the talent, they've got the energy, maybe they've got the expertise as well in some instances, but they just don't have the work ethic or the drive. And maybe it's because they've had it easier sometimes in other parts of their life before, that if things don't come easily, they quit. And then you meet somebody who you think probably is not going to make it, but they just have got such a drive that there is no way that they're going to quit. I think, you don't always know you've got that until you're in a set of circumstances, but it is what you need. You need that no quits attitude. I think,
Mhm.
entrepreneurism is also about, though, doing some due diligence before you start your own venture. I think sometimes people get very excited about the opportunity to have their own business, and they're excited about the potential, but they don't really do enough due diligence beforehand to see whether that business will even stack up properly. So in those instances, it doesn't matter how hard you work, it's going to be very difficult to get where
When
you.
you say diligence, what sort of things do you mean?
But just sometimes simple things like this week, somebody reached out to me and said, I'd value your advice on this opportunity that they'd been given. And so I just some basic things like this. How long has the company been running? Let's have a
Mm.
look at their accounts. Who's behind it? And nowadays, of course, it's easier to do this than ever before in history. You just Google people, you Google accounts, you Google the size of the marketplace, you Google pricing. And so you can get a fair sense of how you need your business to be positioned, because it's
Yeah.
most likely that whatever you're doing, somebody's already doing it, sometimes en masse. And just because there's lots of people doing it, by the way, doesn't mean to say you can't make a success of it. There's loads of stories of that. But I think it's important to understand as much as you can about what it is you're trying to do and the potential before you get started, and then have a clear vision of where you want to be positioned in that space.
And quite a lot of successful people fail, don't they? They fail
Most
before they find their real success, sometimes numerous times. So failure isn't necessarily a bad thing. Goes back to that reframing, doesn't it?
failure is really important. It's a really important learning lesson, and it's fear of failure that stops us doing things. It's absolutely fear of failure that stops us. It's fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of what other people might say or think about us, fear of not fitting in with the current social circle that we've got because we've stepped outside of that social circle to do something that they probably will frown on. All these things hold us back in life.
Interesting you're talking about the social circle. The company that we keep, there's a saying, isn't there, to do with we become, I don't even know if it's true, but it gets bandied around quite a lot, that we become the average of the 5 people we spend most of our time with. Do you think that's important? Our environment, our
Yeah.
people, the people we surround ourselves with?
Yeah, I do. And that doesn't mean to say that you ditch some of the people who've been around you for a long time, because sometimes they're family. Heck, sometimes you're married to them, never mind they're your family. So it's and I'm not saying that's my case, by the way, just in case my listens to this. Um, but but it's true. What you want really, because the journey you're on is a journey that not many people have experienced. many people perhaps in your, unless you happen to hang out with a load of entrepreneurs who are failing or succeeding all the time. That's not most people's environment. So you have to think about being conscious of what you are listening to.
Yeah.
So, my mum is no longer with us, so she won't say it anymore, but almost until the day she died, it wouldn't have mattered how successful I'd been or how much money I'd made or whatever the measurement is. She would always have said, "Oh, wow, Rob, when are you going to get a proper job?" Because that was just her way, and there's nothing wrong with that. That was her mindset. That was her belief. But the important thing is that you recognize that that's their way, but doesn't necessarily need to be your way and shouldn't stop you doing what you want to do. So I would say it's a really good exercise to think about the 5 people that you spend the most time with and then ask yourself, is that okay? Is that okay in the context of, are they supporting you, either with their words or their actions or just by not being negative about what you're doing in your journey? Or are they constantly saying it's the wrong thing or you're making a mistake or you'll fail? And if that's the case and you can identify that, that helps you manage that dialogue better. Rather than you thinking, I need to quit, you know, this is just them. Or you limit the amount of time that you spend in those environments and you go and find people who have a different mindset.
Yeah.
And, I think this is the interesting thing about the world that we're in at the moment, because everything is so visible. There's sometimes in some quarters the mindset that the world is ending, that there's not the right opportunity, that it's harder to get on, that blah, 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 blah. And I actually think the opposite of that. And I want to hang out with people who also think the opposite of that, because we'll be bouncing off each other, supporting each other and inspiring each other rather than, trying to drag people back to your level.
I remember reading many years ago when I first became self-employed that the top 10% in their field, if you're just in the top 10% in terms of being really good at what you do, you will always make money regardless of what is going on in the economic
Yeah.
climate.
Yeah.
And so I think really the best thing anybody can do is just to decide to become really good at their craft or whatever it is they're doing as the insurance policy, really.
Absolutely. And, that's also about mindset, because, you can be good at your craft and your craft could be in the right place at this point in time. But then circumstances beyond your control, the world or the economy could shift that. And
Yeah.
you need to be of the mindset that, okay, that's not quite working right for me at the minute. How do I adapt that to fit where we are?
Yes. So not being fixed and rigid in our thinking, that ability to adapt, not too wedded to things being how they are. I mean, we are seeing a lot of that, aren't we? With the advent of AI now, in terms of
Absolutely.
particular jobs that are supposed to not be going to exist in a few years' time, or even now people's losing certain positions in certain fields of work. So yeah, it's going on right now, isn't it?
It is, and the pace of change, as we've seen, is getting faster and faster and faster. So, to find an opportunity or a business or entrepreneurial path that doesn't require you to make changes along the way is pretty much impossible now. It's very, very difficult to do that. And again, that might mean that there are some industries and businesses that are thriving now that in 5 years from now can't exist or can't survive because of
Yes.
technological changes. But if the entrepreneur, if the owner of that business has an entrepreneur mindset, they're probably going to see that way before it happens. And even if they don't, they're going to be of the mindset, well, that was great while it lasted. I'm not going to blame myself for the fact it failed, apart from I perhaps should have seen it coming earlier. But off I go again, because I think when you're wired that way, it's very hard to unwire yourself.
Yeah.
If you are looking for an angle all the time and you're wired that way, you can't help it. Again, going back to my Nicola, she's often said to me, because we're going to place, and within 10 minutes I'll be figuring out what the turnover might be, what the margins could be, whether this is a good angle. Where's the angle here? And she go, will you just enjoy dinner and sit here without, your brain?
I've actually seen you do that.
Yeah, well, it's in your DNA. You can't it happens.
Yeah. And actually, if you study history, this isn't a recent thing, is it? Sort of,
No.
it's how It's evolution. It's part of evolution, is that things come and go.
I do.
Certain careers of 100 years ago aren't around now, and it's not going to change, and it continues.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you how you stay motivated and passionate, because we all have moods, don't we? And some days things feel easier than others. I'm interested to know who inspires you. And I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, staying motivated is it's a practice. It's not something that it's not a destination you arrive at. There's things that you can do each day to keep yourself feeling inspired and motivated. What do you do?
Yeah,
What's
no,
your
I agree with you 100%. You know, I don't think I've met anybody who's inspired every day and energized every day. And I think that's one of the things to recognize that, you know, we're all human. There's going to be things that happen, or or the way we feel some days isn't going to be that we can conquer the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're just recognizing that you need some downtime sometimes. The thing to recognize is when there's more of those days than there are we can conquer the world days, then you need to do something to fix that and get into that place where you do see, you know, the majority of the time that the world is full of opportunity rather than, you know, obstacles. But I think there's also some things that help you with that. And you know, for most of my life, I've been a very sport orientated person, different sports over the years, depending on, you know, what my age was. And you know, I've in hindsight, when I look back, recognized the times when I've lapsed on my sport, you know, in my mind for justifiable reasons. I'm too busy, I'm traveling, my workload's so much I can't exercise. Then I do find that in my mind is harder to stay positive. So for me, sport or exercise rather than sports or exercise is a great way of getting the right mindset.
yeah.
There are other small things, you know. I'm not a massive music fan, but I in fact, if you looked at my phone, there's in my phone here there is a playlist that says "Going to Work" playlist. That's actually what I've named it. So on it are about, I don't know, 10 tunes maybe, that when I listen to them, get my adrenaline going, get my mindset changed. So, you know, again, if you're just wanting to, maybe you're going to an important meeting or there's presentation you've got to make or something that's a little bit, you know, a bit edgy, play a track from the Going to Work playlist. Music can change your perception instantly.
Completely agree. It's like flicking a switch, isn't it, in terms of changing your emotional mood. And what about the way we talk to ourselves? Because we've all got this voice in our head, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, that's about sometimes also being conscious because we do all have that voice in our head, you know, like a gremlin on each shoulder or a parrot on each shoulder. Visual you want from that, and one of them saying, "You go on, go for it, Bob. You can do this. You've got this. You've done it before. You can do it." And the other one's going, "You're going to make a fool of yourself. It'll never work." And so that, but that's also, it's a bit like the analogy just with the five friends. You know, if you're conscious that some of your friends can be a little bit negative, and you just recognize that, so they don't have the impact on you, it's exactly the same with the voices in your head. You know, if it is that you find that you've got the negative voice more than the positive voice, then you need to really think about how to fix that. And for me, things like having a clear purpose, a clear goal. I've been into goal setting for as long as I can remember, about, you know, what I want to do with my physical health, what I want to do with my work life, you know, that sort of thing, so that you can just go back to that when you've got the negative voices in your head and go, you know, are these still motivational things for me? Yes, they are. Well, then let's just crack on. This is just a, you know, a bad day I'm having.
Yes, and if you think about the thoughts that we have, so many of them are contradictory to one another, aren't they? I mean, there's a stat that's bandied around, 65,000 thoughts a day. I'm not sure how true that is, but I think to sort of live by the idea, don't believe everything you think as well, can be quite useful.
And limit things that are going to chat. You know, like I see people spend so much time on social media and on their phones and just mindlessly scrolling stuff that is just mind-numbingly rubbish and is not going to help them become better, stronger, fitter, healthier, whatever the goal is that they want. And I think this is the other thing about, being a little disciplined there and recognizing it, just being more aware of how these things are making you feel. And if
Yes.
things are not energizing you, then I'm not saying you've got to be energized all the time. It's nice to sit down and watch a bit of television sometimes or read a newspaper sometimes, but just don't get down a warren hole that's not rabbit hole that's not going to help you move
Mm.
forward.
Yes, and I mean, of course, these devices are made to be
Addictive.
addictive, aren't they? And I'm not a neuroscientist, but I believe that they are actually impacting the brain and people's ability to focus and concentrate for periods of time. So it does make sense to limit our time on those things, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure that this is not just a modern day thing. I'm sure that, looking back, there's probably, people who watched too much television years ago weren't necessarily, you know what I mean? So it's just that it's so easy and so accessible now. Everybody lives on their phones, and there's nothing wrong with your phone as such, but it's just about that awareness, isn't it? Of what is this serving me, like the Five Friends story?
Yeah, well, if you're on a train going into London or everybody's on their device, you can
Yeah,
actually sit there and look around the carriage
nobody
and
else heads up.
you don't make eye contact with a soul because everybody has got their head bowed over their device. And
You see it in restaurants. See, we were in a restaurant a few weeks ago. There was a table of four people, and there was not one of them talking to each other. They were all literally on their phones. Oh, okay, maybe it was a work thing, and there was a crisis going on at work. They were all solving stuff. I don't know, but you see it too frequently. I think it's
yeah,
often that they think they're missing something. They've had a message from a friend or a new friend request or whatever. Oh my goodness,
yeah, no presence there, is there? No
trivia.
presence.
Yeah, trivia.
Um, I want to get into the topic of leadership. Has anybody influenced you particularly in the field of leadership and how you've led your teams over the years?
And I think lots of people in lots of different ways that I've observed, I've learned things from. And, one of the people has definitely been somebody that you also know because that's how we met. Joe Adams, who was my mentor for years, had a really great leadership style that I admired. And a lot of it was around some of the stuff that we've talked about. He had a badge on his, whatever occasion he was going to, he'd have a badge on his jacket that said attitude. And
Mm.
that said a lot about, how he approached leadership was, having the right attitude. And, for me, leadership is about helping people grow. It's about supporting people, helping them be the best that they can be and giving people second chances. I don't, well, I would hope that, particularly in my time in Forever Living, nobody ever thought I was a dictatorial boss because that was never the way I wanted an organization to be. It was always that, people could, do something and if it went wrong, come to me and I would understand that they didn't do it deliberately. It was just something that didn't quite work out and we could learn from it and move on. So yeah, I think there's, for me, it's about supporting people, working as a team and giving people the opportunity and the environment in which they can grow.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about teams. I was at an event last year and I can't remember who the speaker was. He specialized in performance, and one of the things he was talking about was that best performing teams are first of all diverse, and secondly they have psychological safety, and that's really much speaking to what you've just been talking about, which is that you can make mistakes and know it's okay. So you're safe to be yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think that's also true of you as the boss. Like if you can never admit to making a mistake, because let's face it, nobody's perfect. Everybody, I make mistakes daily. If you can't say, "Oh, I screwed up again," or didn't do that well, then you're never going to get your team to
Mm.
behave in that way. If you're making out you're perfect, you're not. Nobody is. You're always a work in progress.
Yes, and I don't know about you, but whenever someone puts their hand up and says, "Oh, yeah, that was my mistake," and they show that humility, it just makes me admire and respect them and like them more,
I
not
agree.
less.
I absolutely agree. I think, they are people who are still growing, than the others. aren't. And again, sometimes that can be the environment they grew up in, or even the cultural environment they're working in. It's
Yeah.
sometimes hard to do that if that's not the culture. We all want to fit in, don't we, in some way?
Yes. I mean, I think we could do a whole podcast on culture, don't you?
Exactly, exactly right.
I know that now you're very active in consulting brands on the direct to consumer and how to make that transition if they haven't been
Yeah.
direct to consumer. What's the biggest mistake you see businesses making in the D2C space, or what do you think they could be doing more of? I'm just curious to know what your views are in the whole D2C world.
Yeah, I think in the D2C world, it's the way the world is now technology wise, it's easier to find and acquire customers digitally than ever before, finding customers than ever before. I still think that in the D2C world, there is the need for a human relationship at some point. So, I've got an example that I use as a particular product that I take each day, a nutritional product. I bought it from seeing something on it. I think it was Instagram as a powerful story. I tried it. I have it on a subscription model, and it's a great product. And digitally, the company reinforced why I should continue to take it and what it's doing for me. So that's all good stuff. But I'm 3 years into this journey. I'm yet to speak to anybody at the company. And I think what that exposes the company to is that, there's no loyalty in terms of a human relationship. And so if the same product appeared and maybe it was cheaper or it looked better, my willingness to move would be greater than it would have been if I'd got a relationship with, Diane at this company and she speaks to me and I know her. And so I think for me, the digital space is a really, really exciting space for market growth and for customer acquisition, etc., and even for a degree of customer servicing. But I do think the human, people buy people first, I think. And I think that will always be the case.
I completely agree. And actually, what you're just talking about really resonates with me because I've been taking a particular collagen brand for a number of years. I can't even remember how many years. And I've recently just switched because of price points and also just because I saw what they were doing and it interested me and some of the stories they were telling. And I thought I'd give it a try. So you're right. Even though I've been with that other brand for years, I'm not loyal to it.
Yeah, I think you need a human relationship somewhere. You need to work hard and I think for me, and I use this quote, at different times in different talks I've done over this last couple of years in particular, that the successful D2C companies in the future will be the ones that not only learn how to develop a powerful digital story, but also find ways of being able to make a human connection as well. And, I think if you're creative, you can do that in different ways, customer events or customer recognition, just some human touch.
Yeah.
So, then when somebody like you was faced with what looks like the same product, another collagen, has perhaps the same ingredient list, the packaging looks as attractive, and it's a few pound cheaper, you'd go, well, I'm going to just try this and see what happens. Whereas if you had a relationship with the company that extended beyond price, and beyond a list of ingredients, you are less likely to. I'm not saying that for some people, price is everything, so they'd move whatever. But I just think there needs to be that human element to really get brand and company loyalty.
And that's what keeps me loyal to my little garage men who are very
Yeah.
sweet and take care of me and drop me home after
Yeah.
I've taken my car in. And if my car's late coming back, there's a little bunch of flowers on the passenger seat. Those little touches that increase my loyalty and my buy-in to what they're doing. And that's nothing, and that's not on price at all, is it?
No, it's about the added value things, isn't it? And if
Yeah.
those added value things are mainly a human added value, then you've got a powerful proposition to retain your customers. If it is only, price, packaging, or, performance that they can't get somewhere else, then you're always exposed.
Yeah. What do you think about what's going on in the current economic climate in terms of entrepreneurs? Do you think it's favorable right now for people wanting to start a business? Does economic climate even matter? I'd like to know what you think.
Yeah, I think, like if you waited for the right economic moment, then you'd be waiting for a long period of time, perhaps. And equally, once you've started, if the economy changes, what are you going to do? Bail out and stop? You know what I mean? I think depending on the product, depending on what it is you're trying to do, to a certain extent, I think the economy doesn't really matter in terms of what you're doing to get started. The economy might matter, if you're heavily leveraged in a business with lots of debt, then of course the economy matters massively because servicing that debt is going to cost you more money, and all of a sudden your profitability might disappear. So that, of course the economy matters, but I think, it shouldn't stop you doing something. What it should do is encourage you as a business owner to be thinking about scenarios and how your business might respond to that, so that you can try and, put some things in place that mean the impact of a shift in economy might not be as great as it would be if you've done nothing and all of a sudden it springs up on you. Things go in cycles in businesses. There are always times when it's easier to make money and other times when it's harder to make money. I think if you're evaluating whether the overall proposition is still a viable proposition and the answer is yes, then just do whatever you can to protect yourself against the economic swings.
Yeah. And what about people who are wanting to start a business? They've been doing their jobs for a particular length of time, or maybe they haven't. They love the idea of growing something, starting something. Are there first steps? What advice would you give to someone if you were starting over,
Yeah,
for example?
I think one of the things to I think about, in there are many things to think about. The first thing is that most entrepreneurial ventures that you start don't necessarily generate significant amount of cash very quickly. So in the example you just gave, I would firstly encourage somebody not to quit their job, but to
Yeah.
experiment with an entrepreneurial venture on the side, because I think that way there's a lot less risk and also a lot less pressure.
Yeah.
Because if you step outside of a job without a significant, well, without some sort of resource of money to keep you going, it might take you longer than you think to build that new business. And then when you're under pressure, you don't perform as well, financial pressure, and sometimes that transmits to customers and they think they don't want to buy. So I would make that transition rather carefully in terms of keeping your job, thinking about an entrepreneurial venture that perhaps you could start on the side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you can do that in a way where sometimes, like with a franchise or a work from home self-employed model that you could build around your existing job. Now, I understand, of course, that probably impacts into your social time or your family time or other things that you need to do time. But actually, you know what, if you're wanting to build an entrepreneurial business, there is a price to pay at some point. And so maybe it is that you don't have quite the same social or family time for a little while, but it's if you think that the opportunity is great enough, then it's probably a price worth paying to just say, okay, for the next 6 months, family, I'm not going to be available on a Saturday, because this is what I want to do. And I think
Yeah.
if you can get that support, that would be great. But those are the sort of sacrifices to make. Don't jump into something that you haven't evaluated. There's so many people I know start a business on a whim. Yeah, there's some friends of ours that were running a gym. They decided to start a coffee shop on the side. They didn't calculate how many cups of coffee they needed to sell every day to pay the rent. And they sign themselves into a lease, and in no time at all, it's a noose around their neck. The location wasn't right, the price point wasn't right, the offering wasn't right for where they wanted to be. So don't rush into these things. Do a bit of due diligence.
Yeah.
Um, if there's another business like yours in the neighbourhood, try and find out a little bit about how well they're doing or not, to determine whether it's the right neighbourhood. So don't rush would be my advice. Try and do something with less risk till you get the hang of it.
Yeah, no, that is good advice, and I completely agree with you. The whole thing about you've got to make X amount of money within a certain period of time, that stress is not conducive to success, is it?
No, I think if you haven't been an entrepreneur before, or owned your own business before, worked for yourself before, there's a massive, massive learning curve on so many different levels.
Mm.
So many different levels.
Mm. Yeah, and also there's the mindset shift, isn't there, in going from being in paid employment to running your own show and the responsibility that goes with that. So perhaps a lot of personal development needs to happen at the ahead of taking that leap as well. Ending on a personal question, if that's okay, what does the next few years look like for you? What mountains do you still want to climb, Bob, professionally? Mm. Yeah, completely agree. Great words to end on, Bob. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you, please? Okay, I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes and on the post. So I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you. It's been amazing. Thank you very much.